Hi, everybody. My name is Ella Alonso, and I'm a children's librarian with Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And I'm here with,
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the Laurel Historical Society here on Main Street.
and we are talking about genealogy today. So Anna's presented a presentation for us, and I want to just begin by saying that we are focusing on local genealogy, but a lot of the stuff is going to be kind of wider range. But if you hear us talking about local things, that is because we are both located in Laurel, so that's where we're going to be focusing.
Hey, thanks, Ella. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Okay, great. Thanks, Ella. Okay, so like Ella said, we are going to be focusing on local resources since we're both in Laurel. We're going to kind of have that slant to it, but a lot of what we're talking about can apply anywhere, not just Laurel, not just Maryland, but really across the county. And the other thing we're going to be focusing on today is kind of more of a modern take on genealogy. We'll talk a lot about kind of the traditional methods, but also we'll be talking about how to kind of just do kind of a modern take and modern spin on it. So it'll be geared a little more for teens and young adults, but again, whatever you're into, it'll apply as well. So a lot of the basics we'll be covering here will apply to anybody. All right, so let me switch my screen here. Okay, so just a simple outline of the topics. We're just going to do a brief introduction on what is genealogy and a little bit about kind of the ways to get started. Again, this is going to highlight more of that traditional method that I talked about. And then we're going to be talking about some different ways to put it all together. Once you start accumulating information and documents, it's going to grow very, very quickly. So we're going to be talking about different ways to manage all the information that you're finding out. And then, like Ella mentioned in the introduction, we have some sources and resources for you, especially local entities that will help you on your search. So this is a little bit about what we'll be doing in today's talk. And I wanted to inspire you. So we're going to start and end with a quote. And I think this is perfect for this time of the year. And it's a quote by Maya Angelou. And she said, "We need to haunt the house of history and listen anew to the ancestors' wisdom." And I love that, not only because I love Halloween and I think it is great in terms of house haunting for this time of year, but it's the idea that history is a place and it's a house, and that idea of having a house and a home and a family that you're connecting to, and also the fact that you are the product of hundreds and thousands of people to come down to you through your unique family history and lineage. And it's that idea of that love, of that wisdom being passed down from generation to generation to result in you. And so I love that quote again for a lot of different reasons. But we need to listen anew to the ancestors' wisdom. And we find out that wisdom by doing genealogy, by doing our own family search. So just briefly, we'll be talking about what is genealogy. And as you probably know by now, anytime you hear ology, we know that is the study of. And the gene part is familiar too. You hear that a lot when we talk about biology with your genes and your genetics. And so we're really, studying this idea of family history and lineage. And when we talk about lineage, you can see, lines, very lineal idea. And we're talking about being able to document or trace lines of descent from an ancestor, or in genealogy from multiple ancestors. So if you think about it, you have two biological parents, they have two biological parents, so you're already up to 4 grandparents. You multiply that, you get great grandparents in different sets going backwards in time. You have eventually hundreds and thousands of ancestors that you can potentially trace. And each one of those is a lineage, going through your mother's side or your father's side and all those branches of the family tree. Each one of those is one of your family lines that you can trace and document. But a little more, I guess, colloquial or a modern approach is to think about genealogy is it's a collection of stories, of family histories, of kind of those family tall tales and legends, the stories that you heard maybe growing up that may or may not be true. But they of expressions in your family history, your family traditions, your get-togethers around the holidays. They're the family photographs that you see, the documents, any type of memorabilia, family heirlooms, that kind of thing. And it's really all of that put together is a record of your unique family history. And if you think about it, if you think about your cousins or your extended family, no one is really, the exact same as you. So you might have brothers or sisters in your immediate family that share the same parents as you. And so you have this one family unit. But if you have cousins on your father's side or your mother's side, they have a different set of grandparents than you. So they have a whole different lineage, a different set of family histories that you don't necessarily have. You're connected because you are related by blood, but there's going to be, all these divergence. And that's what I think is so great about genealogy, is finding out this unique family history that's particular to you. And so we're going to be just talking a little bit about why do genealogy. So this is a really very traditional hobby, but it has so many different expressions. So the basic, I guess, reason why people get into genealogy is to really have a better understanding of where and even when you come from. So you have the opportunity to find out about the lives of your ancestors, to get a better sense of what it meant to live when they did, and live in the time and the places that they did. Even if you're talking just a few generations back, what was it like for your parents when they were growing up? What was it like for your grandparents? Especially if they moved from different states or different places, or even if they emigrated from different countries. What was it like to discover your family roots? A lot of times it's very common in genealogy to say, oh, well, I have, Irish Catholic background, and they came off the boat and were to Ellis Island, only to find out that, you have no Irish family whatsoever. And a lot of what you were told when you were growing up is just kind of, family stories that were misunderstood or made up. And so there's a lot of really interesting detective work that you can uncover as you go further and further into your genealogy hobby. And that's also why I like doing genealogy myself, is that it gets you close to that history. Remember the quote we started with in the beginning? It allows you to get to bottom of mysteries, and a lot of these puzzles that you have, a lot of these questions about where people were born or what their life was like growing up, is actually documented, and it's there waiting for you to uncover it. It's there in the census records. It's there in little historical societies like ours in Laurel. It's a challenge, and sometimes it can be very frustrating if you hit a dead end and you can't find your ancestors in their records anymore. It can be very frustrating, but there is always something new to find out. If you hit a dead end with one relative, just skip to the next line, to the branch in your family tree, and you might find a whole new family history that you didn't know, and that's just waiting to be uncovered. So if you like mysteries, if you like solving puzzles, if you're really into critical thinking, then genealogy could be a very appealing hobby for you. And then something else to consider, and this has come into play more recently with kind of the new access to things like the DNA testing through 23andMe, or even Ancestry DNA. It's really a way for you to kind of document your medical history. So as you're going through and you're taking information about where people were born and when and how many brothers and sisters they had and where they moved from and that kind of thing, as much as you're able, it's also very important to document medical history, so you can kind of understand what you might be prone to and what you might have to look out, if you have to look out for skin conditions or heart conditions or things like that that might be part of genetics that you are inheriting. So you are inheriting much more than skin color and eye color, and height and weight and things like that. There's a lot of things going on inside you that you're inheriting from your family from generations back that you might be prone to. And it's important to document that, as well as some of the more traditional aspects of genealogy. Okay, so let's talk about actually how to get started. I hope I've piqued your curiosity enough about maybe getting interested in genealogy. And if I haven't done it, then there's a wealth of information on the internet. And in fact, it can get quite overwhelming. So this is why Ella and I have kind of brought this presentation to you today to kind of whittle things down and take it in a very manageable first couple of steps for you to get into this hobby. But there are fascinating programs out there. One of my favorite is on PBS, Finding Your Roots with Dr. Henry Louis Gates. It's a fantastic program, and it really blends a very personal approach with the science of the DNA testing, but also kind of an art form. You have to kind of understand the history and these personal connections with family genealogy. And that's what's so great about that program. But there's other ones out there like Who Do You Think You Are? And a lot of other ancestor programs out there that you can find on YouTube and other PBS channels. But when you get started in genealogy, it's the very first step is actually an easy step because it starts with you. You are the very first step in your genealogical journey. So you should write down or type out or gather all the information you know about yourself. And so that's not a very hard first step, is it? So you want to write down everything that you can know about yourself, your full name, where you were born, including the city, the county, and the state or the country. You want to include everything that you think you know about your parents' names, about your siblings if you have them. You want to include maybe things like where you live right now and when you're recording all this information about yourself, because as you progress in your hobby, those things are going to change. I started talking to my grandparents when I was, I don't know, maybe like 12 or 13. I think I had a school project for it to talk to my grandparents about, about their childhood. And then it just kind of stuck with me. So, we did the school project. And then after that, I just kind of was still interested in it. So I talked with them a little bit more. And as I went through my notebooks, we moved around my family and I got more information. So it's important to kind of document when and where you are in your genealogical journey when you start to document yourself as well. And so you might not have these things, especially if you are a teen or a young adult, but it's important to have these, at least a copy of them. So get a copy of your birth certificate or your adoption records or your immigration records, whatever you have that kind of documents your journey in this world. And so these are things that you can start out with. And as you progress in life, you might have things like your marriage license. Eventually, someone will collect your death certificates. You might then collect your birth certificates of your children, your adoption for your children, or things like that. So you want to start out with yourself. And then you're going to start branching off into your family history, into your family tree. And so the next step is, after you collect information about yourself, you're going to want to collect information about your parents. And again, it's best to get copies if you can. If you can scan it and digitize it right off the bat, that is the best way. But also, just Xerox it. Make a paper copy of your the birth certificates for your parents. And if you are dealing with adoptive parents or step parents, it's important to document that too, not just your biological parents. So you also can document your step siblings, your half brothers and sisters, and your step parents as well. And you want to get information and copies of their marriage records, their death certificates, their divorce records. If they were in the military, that's also a great source of information, because once they are part of the military, then you have this whole new door that opens to you, and that's where you can find them in federal records. So they might be, you might find information about your parents or your relatives if they were in the military, because then you might find them in places like the National Archives and other federal sites and holdings. You might also want to collect property records if they had a deed, if they own houses, or if they own property somewhere. You might want to record their siblings' names, so your aunts and uncles, the dates of their birth, death, and marriage. And if they have any type of scrapbooks or diaries or any family memorabilia, it's nice to make copies of it now or take pictures of it. We have so much technology available to us now. We can upload things to the cloud. You can put things on your computer and file folders and kind of organize it that way. And we'll talk a little bit about putting it all together in just a little bit. But then the natural progression is after you and your parents, then we're splitting off into grandparents. So you're talking about your father's parents and your mother's parents. Again, you want to document the basics, the big three, the birth, death, and marriage records. If you have obituaries and grave information, especially if they're not living, you want to document that as well. So maybe you have obituaries from the newspaper, or maybe from the church, or from a faith congregation that documented their service. And the grave information, the cemetery, and the plot information on where they're buried is particularly important. You also want to talk about property and military records as well. And here you might have the opportunity, starting with your grandparents, to look in the census records. And I just want to talk about that briefly. We won't get into too much detail on it, but what happens, we talked about how important the federal records are when it comes to military records. Well, the census, as we know, when we've probably heard about it in this year in 2020, every 10 years, the US government issues a census, and it's up to everyone living in the United States to fill out the census. And it's a great source of information, not only for our current government, because it gives municipalities money toward emergency management, toward funding for schools and for highways and roads and all kinds of utilities. But it's also a wealth of information for historians and researchers, because you can find out when and where people were living and who they were living with. And they do this every 10 years, but it's not available as soon as the information is gathered. So the 2020 information that they're gathering this year won't be available for 71 more years. And that's kind of, I'll say, the statute of limitations on that. And that's kind of a reasonable estimate of a person's lifetime. So after 71 years have passed, they will release the information, and that most people would not, always be living at that time. So it's kind of a way to protect personal information. So the most recent census that was released was the 1940 census. So your grandparents were probably maybe born and recorded by the 1940s. So that means anyone born and living before 1940 would be recorded on that 1940 census. And so then the next one to be released, I think in another 2 years, will be the 1950 census. So we're waiting for that information as well. So that happens on a regular schedule. And again, it's a wealth of information, and they have done it every 10 years since 1790. So it's going all the way back every 10 years. You're not going to get consistent information, especially in some of the earlier federal census records. They really only list the head of the household, which is not going to be a female in most cases. It's not going to be immigrants. It's not going to be enslaved people. It's going to be typically a white male household. And anybody who was living in their house in the 1790 census, for example, they'll just have the number. So it might have one female, about 20 years old, maybe 3 children, and they just have little total numbers. So it's very hard to determine the names and ages of people in those early federal census records. But as you get into more modern times, you have a wealth of information. You can find out where they emigrated from, where their parents emigrated from, what their native language is, whether they can read and write, whether they own property or they rent their property, and what their occupation is. So it's a wealth of information, and it really can help you kind of uncover little clues and mysteries. For example, I think in the 1910 census in my family, I have one of my family members listed twice in 2 different places. And it's the same person, same birth date, same name, but he's listed with kind of one family in one area, and then he's listed with different people at his place of business. So we have to figure out if that was just a mistake and he was recorded or enumerated twice, or if there was something really weird going on with his family and marital life status at the time. But it's a great mystery to find out. And those census records are really a valuable source of information and really the foundation of genealogical research. Okay, so we'll move on with the getting started. Once you start digging deeper into yourself, into your parents, into your grandparents' generations, you're going to start to accumulate stuff. Lots of stuff, lots of documents, lots of information. And we're going to be talking now about how to kind of put it all together. What do you do with all of this stuff? And one thing that you're going to start working with in order to make sense of all of this information is whether you do it kind of the traditional paper and pencil method, or you do it through modern software like Ancestry or Family Tree Maker or anything like that. Or if you're just doing it kind of on a computer spreadsheet, you're always going to have to, find and use different forms and charts, and we'll show those in just a few minutes. This really is the basis of your record keeping. So the form you keep your records in can change according to your personal style, but the basis is going to be these family sheets and the charts that I'll show you in just a few minutes. So that's really going to be where you're writing down all of these really detailed information: the names, the full names, the married names, the places, the dates, house numbers, anything like that, the really detailed information, so you can come and refer to it whenever you need additional information. Another thing that you can do when you'll start to accumulate, and something that I urge you to do now before people pass away, before people move out of state, or before people move out of the country, is talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, talk to your older relatives, and find out everything they know about your family. Now, yes, that sounds very daunting. And if you're just starting in your genealogical journey, you might not ask all of the questions that you think you should. And but it's better than nothing. I was fortunate, I got interested in genealogy, like I said, around middle school, early high school age, and I did it for off and on for 10-20 years, up until my grandmother died. And even after she passed away, there were still questions that I wish I had asked her, even though we had years and years and years together, going through family history and talking about family stories. There's always going to be something that you wish you would have known or thought of early. But don't be discouraged by that. Use that as inspiration to start now. Start talking to the people, to the family, especially to your oldest family members, and seeing what they have to share with you about your family history. You can start going backwards from there, from what they tell you. So if you hear place names or family names or dates, or if they're not quite sure about spellings or where things took place, then you can start filling in those gaps from there based on those historical records we talked about: the birth, the death, the marriage certificates, the census records, history files that are in your local libraries or historical societies. And we'll show that at the very end when we talk about the resource section. And then we also have to talk about the importance of writing everything down. And I will say, write it down. I tend to be a paper and pencil kind of gal, and I'm very traditional in my approach. I love just writing notes. I love having binders of information about my family history. But if you're not, that's fine. You don't have to be. You can type things on your computer. You can, keep it in the cloud. You can do blogs. You can do Family Maker software. You can do ancestry.com. As long as you have a place to have this written information in some format, that's fine. And the other thing that you might find out, especially when you talk to your other family members, is that see if anyone has already started doing genealogical research. And that's what happened when I talked to my grandmother. I found out that she had really started gathering all of this information. Same thing, she just started handwriting out everything she could remember about her aunts and uncles, about her grandmother, And a lot of it was really valuable when I then went back to my own journey and kind of confirmed these things that she had written down. I didn't really have to reinvent the wheel. I could just check to see if that wheel was already already in existence. I didn't have to start from scratch. But I will just take a quick side note to say that even if you don't do the traditional old school paper and pencil way, you do want to have things in different formats. That's kind of just a no-brainer, especially coming from a school setting, is that anytime you do work and research and term papers and research papers, back up your work, have different copies in different places. And so that's why I like paper copies of things, because the internet could go out, the power could go out, and you might not have access to your computer files. And I will say that once you do start going out into the world to do research, going to libraries and historical societies or county courthouses, some places actually don't let you take phones or computers into their research facilities. So definitely double check before you actually start to go out on your research trips. Some of them just require the old school paper and pencil, and that's the only thing that you're allowed into the research room. But other places like the National Archive, they will allow you to take scanners and your own computer and your own cameras in with you. People come in there with big trolleys of equipment in order to facilitate the research they're doing at the National Archive. So it can run the gamut on what you're allowed to do, but it's kind of a way of saying make backups, put copies in different places, and don't rely too heavily on one format or the other, especially in public places. You might be limited in what you can take into these research facilities. Okay, so we're going to be talking about these research, the methods, and how you're going to keep your records together. So one of the things you're going to be working with a lot, again, in different formats, through software, through paper and pencil, through spreadsheets, are you going to be your pedigree or your ancestral charts? And that's what we're looking at right now. It is kind of kind of a digitized version of a family tree. You can start seeing it branch out. And this is meant for a very kind of quick overview of your family tree. It's not meant for a lot of detail. We'll get into that in just a moment to where you can record that detail. But this is a great overview to see where your gaps are or where your lineage is descending from. And so how you read this chart is kind of typically how you read. You read from left to right and then from top to bottom. And number one is always you, especially on your first chart. So number one is going to be you. So this is where you write your name, your birth date, your birthplace, and any additional information about yourself. If you're married, if you have a spouse's name, you're just going to record just the very basics on this sheet. And then as you start branching out, you're going to move on to number two and number three. And this is where we get into a little of the paternalistic history of genealogy. The top half of the paper, the even numbers, are always going to be the males, the father's line, the paternal line. So number two is going to be your father. Number three is going to be your mother. Number four is going to be your father's father, or your paternal grandfather. And then number six is going to be your mother's father or your maternal grandfather. So they're kind of split like that, but it's always going to be the male and then female, male, female in that way. And so you're going to record the same information, your parents' information, your father in number two, your mother in number three, your father's father in number four, your father's mother in number five, your mother's father in number six, and your mother's mother in number seven. And I only have half of its chart here on the screen, but you can see it's going to expand out two at a time onto each pair until the edge of the paper. And so once you reach the edge of the paper, you'll have different numbers depending on what chart you're using. And you can see kind of in the upper left, right under the name, it says chart number, and you're going to keep track of your charts. And it says number one on this chart equals number blank on chart blank. So So it's going to be a little confusing. This might throw you a little bit into this technicality, but I want to mention it to you because this is, again, an important part of record keeping. Just like you number pages in your notebook, or just like you put page numbers in your Word documents, you're essentially just putting page numbers on your chart here. And so number 1 on your very first chart is going to be you. But once you reach that edge of the paper, you might have another set of parents and grandparents going back maybe 2 or 3, 4 more generations. So you're going to start with maybe, we'll use number 4 on this example. So maybe your father's father, your paternal grandfather, you have different information. So number 4 on this chart is going to become number 1 on another chart. So it's a way for you to kind of reset the lineage and expand out more. And once you get to your furthest spot on that second chart, you're going to take that furthest ancestor, put it back in the number 1 spot, and grow it out from there. Now, some of you might be able to do that better than others, and some of you will have more expanded family histories and lines than others. So for my father's side, for example, there's one line of his family. I can go back maybe 10 generations. I can go back really far. But on the other side of his family, I can only go back maybe 3 or 4 generations. So don't be discouraged by that. That's what kind of that mystery solving and that puzzle solving is all about. But again, the more you branch out, the more you're going to have to take and reset that ancestral chart. So you're going back to number 1 for the people. And that way, you don't get like this huge long piece of paper that just keeps going branching out into a ridiculous length. You get to kind of truncate it and start over so that fits very neatly on a screen or very neatly in a binder. So if I've confused you too much on that, you can just Google it or talk to me. It'll make more sense once you start getting your family recorded on these charts. The second chart that you're really going to be working a lot with are your family group sheets. Now, this is where you put the detail. This is where you start with the same information that you recorded on your ancestral charts, the names, the dates, but you're going to be going into much more detail on each individual person, especially the married couple, the mother and the father. So you're going to have tons of information as much as you know. Maybe you know their occupation from the census records. Maybe you know what church or synagogue or mosque or whatever faith congregation they were associated with. You can write that down. Maybe you know where they're buried, or if you know if they served in the military, you can write down what branch and what unit and what years. And then also what you do next is then you record the products of that union, all the children in order. So if it were me, I would record my father and my mother. And then I was the oldest, so I would put myself in child spot number 1. I'd fill out everything about me, and then I would put my sister in number 2 since she's younger, and I would do the same thing with her. So the family group sheet is a detailed record for one family unit, typically the parents and the product of that marriage. If there was a secondary marriage and there were children, there were half siblings or step siblings, they would get a different family group sheet. And the same thing is if now there are products of the unions on that. So my sister now has 2 children, so I would start a new family group sheet for my sister, her husband, and her 2 children. And you would do the same thing for each kind of family unit as you go back. So you will appear on a family group sheet as a child from your parents, but then eventually you might appear on your own family group sheet as the parents to your children. So it just kind of depends. There will be several people that will appear on different family group sheets. But again, this is a great place to put all the information. It's also a good place to kind of make notes about where you found this information. Again, remember I said I'm old school, so on the back of these family group sheets, I write down, oh, I found this information on the 1940 census and the 1930 census. And I looked at this website, and this was the information that I found from that website. So I can kind of keep track So that way I don't have to go back and was like, well, where did I get that information? Or if I find it online again, I don't have to waste time looking at, oh yeah, that's right, I already looked at this. And I wanted to throw out some information now about kind of working beyond the written records and talking to your family members. Talk to whoever will talk to you, really. Start, if you can, with the oldest family members, but then just talk to everybody. You never know what information they have that might be different from other people in your family. You know, my father was one of 9, so I have lots of aunts and uncles to talk to. And when I talk to them, some of them have different stories and other ones have no idea what I'm talking about because they never heard those stories. So talk to anyone and everyone in your family. That'll make time for you. So just kind of like you would do an interview if you're doing a research paper or something else, you want to make sure that you can schedule a time that you have time for, but also to be courteous of the person that you're interviewing. Make sure that you can schedule a time. And even now in these kind of current situations, you can do it over the phone, you can do it over Skype or Zoom, however you want to set that up. You do want to take notes, even if you are recording it. You just kind of want to have that backup system and those copies in place. And then you want to also make sure that you get the stories when you're talking about it. But when you're talking to your interviewee, check the facts and the spellings. Don't be afraid to ask them to repeat something or ask them to spell out a person's name or a place name, especially if it's an area that you're not familiar with. And remember, they might get it wrong. They might not spell it correctly, but you're going to be able to fact check their information and their stories, and that will give you a much better starting point if you ask them to kind of confirm what they know before you go back into the records and kind of confirm their information that they give you. So I won't go through all of this, and we're hoping that maybe possibly in the future, Ella and I will bring you a program about specifically just talking to your family and doing what we call oral history, gathering your family stories, making records and transcriptions of the information and stories that they tell you. But for right now, it's not really possible to separate out genealogy from the oral history at this stage. So you're going to get a lot of stories, you're going to get a lot of family information through these interviews that you're doing. And interviews tends to give it an air of formality to it. But if it's just you and your grandparents sitting on the couch, 6 feet away, of course, talking about your family history, that's fine too. It definitely does not have to be very formal, but you want to make sure that you have the time dedicated to it and you're documenting and taking good notes on it. So you want to find out about their home life, find out about their nicknames. Maybe not just shortened versions of their first name, but also, maybe they have really weird names. Like, for example, I found out that my grandfather's nickname as a child was Whitey. And we're like, how did that come about? It's because he had super, super, like, completely white blonde hair as a child. And as he grew up as an adult, he had brown hair. So that never made sense to me why he would be nicknamed Whitey. But you can see in one of the early baby pictures, his hair is like so blonde as to be completely white. So that was his nickname when he was a little kid. And I would have no idea if I hadn't asked my grandmother about that. You might also want to find out information about your family names, like if you were named for a particular relative, why were you named that? I was named for my father's mother. She had died the year before I was born, so I never knew her, but I was named in her memory. So that's kind of a nice family connection, even though I never had the chance to know her growing up. But just find out where they lived. Maybe they lived in the same town or the same house their whole lives, but maybe they moved around a lot. And just kind of find out what that was like. What did they do together? What were their family traditions? Did they have different holiday traditions or different recipes? I love to cook, so I would always try to ask my grandmother the recipes for what she remembers eating around the holidays and things like that. And then it's kind of nice to go and branch out as they grow older. So you want to talk about what school was like, what schools they attended, who their best friends were, if they went to the same school as their siblings. Did they play sports? Did they play an instrument? Were they in the school plays? And this is fun information to kind of get a better idea of what life was like for your parents or grandparents or family members. But it also will give you another clue as to where you can find information to document their life. Because maybe if you go to that high school, you'll find an old program for that play that your great uncle starred in Peter Pan or something like that. So you can have information about that. And then just ask them, like, what was popular when they were growing up? What music did they listen to? What dances did they do? If they grew up in a particular faith tradition, what church or synagogue or mosque or congregation did they attend? And also, what kind of games did they play as children? Where did they play? And did they take family vacations? Where did they take their vacations at? Was it every year? Did they switch up? What were their favorite toys, favorite colors, favorite food, restaurants, that kind of thing? And then as they're growing older, you can document how they grew up and where did they work and what was their first job? What was it like? And then if they can recall as they grew up, what was the world like around them? Do they recall really national and international events like the Kennedy assassination or man walking on the moon, or the Great Depression or the stock market crash or anything like that? Some of these really big world events, what was their personal reaction to them? You'll get a lot of good information about them that way. And then we want to talk about how to document these sources. And again, this is great to get this information, to be able to have that experience of talking to your family members. But you also have to take what they're saying with a grain of salt. So you need to document it the same way that you would document your sources if you were doing a research paper or a term paper or anything like that. Just because it's written in a book doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or mostly true. Just because your grandmother said it doesn't mean she remembers it correctly or that it's true. So you want to verify the information that you get from your family. And what I mean by that is, again, that you were born, that, the date and the place where you were born, but what information can verify that, document it and back it up? Your birth certificate. The same thing with marriage certificates, death certificates, census records. These are all ways to document the information you get. So again, it's no different than quoting a source or citing a paper or newspaper article in a term paper. You want to document where you got this information, and just putting, oh, my grandmother told me, it's a good starting point. It's kind of like using Wikipedia for a source. It's a good starting point, but it's maybe not the most accurate or scholarly. So you want to go to those additional primary sources. Something else that you might find at places like the Laurel Historical Society or regional libraries, for example, are going to be secondary sources like printed family histories. And these are particularly popular a couple decades ago as well. And people still do it, but kind of less so in this day and age. And you're going to find printed family histories. So you might actually kind of get lucky and find printed family histories for a particular branch of your family tree. And again, this will give you information that you could fill in some of these gaps, and it might tell you where they got that information. So it's always good. Again, you don't want to kind of just take it on what someone else said. You want to go and verify those things yourself. So even if you have a printed family history, you're going to want to go back to the census records, make a copy of it, and verify the facts for yourself. And this is what I said before about keeping a research log. I just write it on the back of that family group sheet, but you might want to keep a log or want to tally in a Word document or something like that about what websites you looked up, what the keyword searches, what families you were looking for. It's really tempting just to type in all your family names all into these search engines and see everything that you find, but you're going to get kind of confused, and it's going to be more difficult to document everything. So as tempting as it might be just to put in all of your family names that you're looking for, focus on one branch at a time, or focus on one surname or one family name at the time. It'll be a little easier for you to kind of keep all the details straight, to get focused on it, and it'll be easier for you to verify and to document and to record what and where you found out your information. Okay, so now that you have all of this stuff, what do you do with it? And this is where we have different options. This is kind of where the traditional genealogical hobby meets kind of the modern options that we have. When I first started out, I just had a plain old notebook, a regular spiral bound notebook that I just kind of took notes and scribbled in. And I just recorded all my information and the notes I found and what I wanted to find out as well, like what questions I wanted to ask my grandmother next and things like that. So you can go, again, very traditionally, put it in a notebook, find something that speaks to you, especially if you're into calligraphy or kind of lettering and paper. You can find really, really special notebooks and journals and binders, and you can decorate them in different ways and kind of group your family that way. I kind of started it simple and I kind of kept it simple. I have binders and a set for my father's side of the family and then one for my mother's side of the family. And so it's kind of in my mind, that's where the branches start. So I kind of have different binders and sets of information for that. But this is a great way to kind of build on other things that you're interested in. If you are into art and if you're an artist, then build on what you do already and kind of take inspiration from your family history. I am not an artist, so that's why I rely on notebooks. But if you are an artist, make copies of the letters or the photographs or the keepsakes that you're coming across and make a collage out of it, or make an ornament for the holidays coming up. Make it into jewelry, into a locket, or a tattoo or something like that. There's really, really fun modern ways that you can incorporate this information that you're finding out into expressions that not only document the information that you're finding out, but also something that means something to you and is meaningful that you will keep with you. Similarly, you could also keep a scrapbook of information. Scrapbooking is still pretty popular, so you can really kind of compile everything that you're talking about in a very kind of multimedia format. So this is where you can keep track of letters and family photographs, even memorabilia. If you have things like jewelry or three-dimensional objects that you've been given, you can kind of keep them in a scrapbook along with the printed or the written documents that you're making copies of as well. When my sister's first child was born, when my niece was born, I actually made a family scrapbook. So I made copies of family photographs and I wrote down dates and names and places and I traced it a couple generations all the way down to her and used her birth announcement as kind of the first starting page of the scrapbook. So that was something, something that I did kind of artistically to document my niece and on her birth. But we also have a lot of modern interpretations of that as well. So if you're not an artist or you're not into writing down notes, you have a lot of new technology available to you. So you can document your family history solely on websites such as Ancestry.com. The Church of Latter-day Saints does the Mormons in Utah. They do a phenomenal search as well. They have free software that you can use, and they have separate databases of information as well. You can make your own blog, you can make your own website and kind of document your family search process as well. Again, I wouldn't kind of lay all your eggs in one basket, to use that metaphor. So I wouldn't just put everything I'm finding into Ancestry, for example. I would have backups of information. I would have copies in other locations, again, just in case Ancestry goes down or you can't access it or something like that, you'll have that information in a different medium. But there are a lot of different websites, different softwares, different technology available to you today. And that's another great option for making sense of all the information that you're finding out. So we said that we were really taking kind of a modern look at genealogy, but we're also taking a local approach to it. And as we started off by saying, the most important thing you can do when you take your first steps in genealogy is to start with yourself. The most important thing you can do when you're taking those first steps is not go too far from where your family is. So you want to stay as local as possible when you're starting out, and then branch out from there. So if you are in the Laurel area, you can start with us, with the Laurel Historical Society. And I am biased, of course, but I think the Laurel Historical Society is great because we have information about anything related to Laurel, anything that people have given us and donated, and things that we have collected and researched. And what's important about Laurel, as you probably know, is that Laurel not only includes the city of Laurel, but it includes Anne Arundel County, Prince George's, Howard, and Montgomery counties. So we have information scattered across 4 different counties that in other areas you might have to go to 4 different historical societies or county governments to find information. We might have copies of that where you're just the one-stop shop and you can come to us. You still probably have to go to the county level, but we are a much better and much more local option to start with. And what information can you find at historical societies? A lot of what we have are rather typical of historical societies. We have an online catalog, and I'll show that URL in just a minute. And we have about 5,000 artifacts digitized, photographs, documents, three-dimensional objects digitized. And you can do a keyword search on a family name if you want, and you can find out information if we have anything digitized in our collection about it. We also have the local newspaper, the Laurel Leader, or the News Leader. When it first came out, ever since 1897, we have the complete run of the Laurel Leaders from 1897 all the way up to the present. Actually, I lied. We don't have 2019 digitized yet, but all the way through 2018, we have that digitized. Most of it, I would say about half, is searchable. So you could do keyword searches on family names or place names. But this is a great source of information, especially if you're looking for obituary or newsworthy events in your family's history. We also have separate obituary and family history files. And we have digitized yearbooks and other documents. So we have yearbooks from Laurel High School, from Pilati High School, from some of the junior schools as well. And this is great because, again, like I said, you could find out really great information about the play or the concerts or the sport teams that your ancestors were involved with. And we also have a genealogy group. So I mentioned that I tend to be an old soul when it comes to this. I am a paper and pencil person. We have a genealogy group that up until COVID met about 8 times a year. They are also more traditional, let's say. They tend to be older. They tend to be doing genealogy for quite a few years. And they're much more traditional in their focus. But for the last year, they have been focusing almost exclusively on lectures and presentations featuring the latest DNA testing and what information you can glean from that. So they really are into technology, just maybe not on different website research and things like that. But 2 other areas that you can branch out into once you've kind of exhausted your local research is in Maryland. You have 2 great resources. You have the Maryland State Archives in Annapolis. And again, I don't know what the current pandemic research policies are, but before COVID and sometime after, you would be able to go into the research room. It would be free of charge. You would just have to sign in, and you can find information that the archivist will pull for you from your family history. They do have some records digitized online, and they do have finding aids online. So you can do a lot of preliminary research. And if you go there in person, you can request documents and use that to help with your family history. You can also do the same thing at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. They that's their new name. They were formerly known as the Maryland Historical Society on Monument Street in Baltimore. So a pretty close location for us as well. Again, they used to, before COVID, welcome researchers into the research room. You just needed an appointment, and they will go and pull information for you. And they also have digitized collections online and finding aids as well. So those are kind of the three resources that I would start with in terms of genealogical research and kind of more of a historical society approach. And I know that Ella has some information about how to do the same thing with the library system.
Yeah, so this is great so far. I'm just going to pop in for just a quick second to talk about the library and some of the stuff we have. So we have, of course, our online catalog with all of our material that circulates. So you can go on our website and see what you can actually request from the library to take home with you. And our collection does include books about our local resources. And we do have some books specifically in our collection from and about the Laurel area, but most of the branches do. We have our digital newspapers. Those are now online as well, so you can access those from home. And we put most of our genealogical databases in a suite on our website called Discovery Suite, and it will help all of these databases, including a library version of Ancestry, which is currently available at home. Usually you can only access it in the branch, but because of COVID and because no one is currently in the branch, it is available at home. So that's kind of a great way to start, especially since Ancestry, for kind of all of their features, is not free. It's a good way to kind of poke around the website. And then because Ann mentioned some creative aspects, I am going to plug Creative Bug, which is kind of like if Pinterest and YouTube had a baby. It's a bunch of videos on how to make creative projects, and they're really simple and straightforward for beginners. So I would recommend them if you've gotten to the stage where you want to create stuff. So those are some of the resources that we have. You're always welcome to contact us for more information. We're available via phone for any research questions that you have. And then on our website, we have a form that you can fill out and we'll get back to you, especially if you have a really in-depth question that you don't want to go into over the phone. So I'm going to turn it back to Ann for the rest of her resources. And then I have a few questions, but like her, I'm paper and pencil, so I'm taking notes as she's talking. Give me 1 second.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Ella. I love the library, and especially Prince George's Library. They've done a great job with just the amount of resources that they have available. And like Ella mentioned, especially databases like Ancestry, they're not typically free. They are free to get started, free to start an account, but a lot of what you want to do, especially when you get more involved in your research, is hidden behind a paywall. And so that can be really deflating. But if you go to your local library and with your library card, you can, access a lot of these great genealogical databases like Heritage Quest and Ancestry. And so I would encourage you, again, just to use your local library. They are great for so many things, especially for genealogy. So then, yeah, just another couple slides here just to mention. So this was the digitized database that we have that I had mentioned a few minutes ago. So our regular website is just laurelhistoricalsociety.org, but we utilize a museum database system that will that allows us to put digitized versions of our collection online. So we have about half of our holdings available online now. Again, this is free. This is available 24/7. You go to laurelhistoricalsociety.pastperfectonline.com and you can do all kinds of great searching. You can do just photographs. You can do a keyword search. You can do a date search. And you'll see we have things like these great pictures and the picture behind me. We have really great photographs and documents digitized in our collection. And then we also have things like ashtrays and placemats from restaurants. We have textiles. So we have wedding dresses and military uniforms. And so we have a lot of great things digitized, especially items like the textiles that you wouldn't really just be able to come in and walk off the street and touch, but you can see it available on our website. Again, that's free, available 24/7. And if you do want to have a copy of these things or come in and do research in person, we are doing limited research appointments in person in our research library at the Historical Society currently. But we also, as much as we're able, we do accommodate research requests online. So if you go to our website, you can email me personally, or you can email research at laurelhistoricalsociety.org, and we'll try to help you do some remote research as well. And then just finally to wrap up, there are, like I said, especially with the internet and everything just booming, it's a completely different world from where I started. And yes, I got started just as the internet was building up into these things. So that's why I'm traditional with the paper and pencil. But there are so many resources and databases out there. It can get overwhelming. These are some of the best known databases. The ones that I mentioned, Ancestry is the big one. They are huge. Family Search is also the Latter-day Saints one based in Salt Lake City, Utah that I mentioned. They also have a huge database. Both of them are constantly digitizing and updating new information all the time. So if you don't find something about your family now, it's possible that in another couple months, they will have some of the information that you're looking for. Archives.gov is the National Archives. They have a great website of other links and databases and websites that they did such a great job that I didn't feel the need to add any additional links. I just linked to that and another genealogical organization that has all kinds of links to different databases and specialty databases too, especially if you are researching like African American family history or Irish American or German American. There are specific databases just for very specific racial or ethnic backgrounds, or different areas of the world, different immigration patterns, people, maybe, your people that came from like Hamburg in Germany or Amsterdam, or they came from very specific ports. You can track it through those very specific databases. In terms of the blogs and podcasts, I kind of like this website. This is new to me, but it's kind of fun because it's a much more modern take on genealogy. It's kind of fun and modern and quirky and pretty. So that might give you some inspiration as well, in addition to the sources that Ella mentions. And then in terms of the forms, Ancestry is just one source. If you Google Pedigree chart or ancestral chart or family group sheet, you'll get a lot of different hits for that. And then just find out what you like, find out what information that you like and the style that you like, and then just copy it or download it. Again, a lot of these are free. They just have a little copyright or something down at the bottom. But then a lot of these, if you wanted to print them out and write down on pieces of paper and pencil, you can do that too. Ancestry kind of has them built in where you can fill them in as like a PDF or a Word version on your computer and save them that way, or you can upload them to your Ancestry.com account. So I think that's all that we have today. Again, to end as we began with words of inspiration, this time from William Faulkner, the past is not dead, it isn't even past. So some very heavy thinking there for you. Again, when you do genealogy, it connects you to the past. That's why I love museum work. That's why I love archaeology, because it might be might have happened in the past, but when you're looking at your family history, when you're looking at all these records and documents, it's bringing it alive again. You're bringing into living memory these people who are, who are dead and buried, for generations. So this is a kind of a deep quote for you to think of, but that's another reason why I love genealogy so much. Is it makes your family come to life. You're the living product of all of these people that you're researching. So I will end the slideshow there, and I'll turn it back over to Ella to wrap anything up that she needs to.
Yeah, I'm back again. Well, thank you so much. I started with a ton of questions, but you've actually answered all of them through the presentation, so I appreciate that. I'd recommend all of our patrons check out, when it is safe to do so, the Laurel Historical Society in person.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Ella. Yeah, I had a lot of fun putting this together. Like I said, I love history, and when it's your own family history, you just learn so much, and it's there's so many new things coming to light in terms of the technology, and I just know that we're gonna learn so much more. And as you watch shows like these, like Finding Your Roots, they just have like these great family connections. So of course they're more celebrity based, but you just really have these connections that, there's memories in the genes that you hold, so I really feel, very strongly that, your genetic memory is going to be just as important as like your medical history. So all the things in your genes that make you unique, you're holding your genetic memories of your ancestors and your migration stories and things like that. So I think that's going to be a really kind of a future of where genealogy is going. So there's always something to find out. And yeah, just there's a lot of great resources at the local library and here at the Historical Society. So if there's any questions, yeah, contact us. We'll be glad to help you out.
Yeah, so we will put our contact information in the chat, but otherwise, we hope that you will join us for future programming.
Yep.
So again, thank you so much for joining us, and
Thank you.
we'll talk to you later.
All right, take care.